Welcome back to Fun with Java. At this point, you should have completed your calculator project and submitted it as a Java application. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of do a quick overview of the four different types of loops in Java and kind of talk about what the AP exam expects you to be able to do with these loops and just, some other stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to first need a new project. Oops, not a new file, a new project. There we go. And we'll call it a Java application. And we'll call it loops. Loop-de-doops. And everything should be the same, everything default settings, so that's good. And we'll go ahead and wait for ever. Okay. There it is. It's done. We're not going to need a JFrame for this particular project, so you don't need to get one of those. But remember, if you did, you could get it through a new file. And here we are with our basic class. All right. So there's a couple different types of loops. You guys are familiar with them. There are for loops. There are while loops. And in Java, there's also two other kinds that we really need to know. There's a enhanced for loop, and there's also the do while loop. All right, these are four completely different ways of accomplishing the same task, which is to essentially loop through a number of items and do something every time you go through it. It's called iteration as far as computer science goes, and it's basically the only reason why computers exist, so we can iterate through things millions and millions of times, if necessary, to do a certain task repetitively. So the basic types of loops, which are the ones that I favor just because they give you the most control over the loop, there's the least amount of magic happening, and I think it lets you understand what loops are the most, are the basic for loops. So for loops in Java are essentially identical as they are in JavaScript. You type for, you do parentheses, there's an initializing component. You do have to declare it slightly differently, but the rest of it is essentially the same. We'll say I is less than 10 and I plus plus. And if all goes according to plan, yay, it looks like it works well enough. Alright, so if you print the output, like if you print what I is, what is it, system dot out dot println. If you print out I, you should get a list of integers from 1 to 10, right? Because if I is 0, and we're going to start at 0, and we're going to perform this code until I is less than 10, we're going to add 1 to I every time, we should get a list of numbers from 1 to 10. And sure enough, if you run it, let's see, maybe we're lucky, maybe we're not, please be nice to me. Sure enough, we got a list of 10 integers from 0 to 9. Okay. Now, the first thing that you're going to need to have to do to succeed on your AP exam is you really need to be able to pick apart these loops and modify them and, basically play with these three parameters in the for loop to see what happens. For example, you could receive a question that says, okay, what's the output going to be for this loop? You'd have to be able to select that the output should start at 5 and end before I is 10. You should be able to predict that you'll get a list of numbers from 5 to 9. Sure enough, you do. What about the output for this loop? I'll give you a second. If you're playing the home game and you figured out that, all right, it should be a list of numbers in multiples of 2 until I is 10. So basically 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Sure enough, that's what it is. Okay. Now, those are easy ones, but what happens if you start to get really complicated? What do you think about that one? I'm actually not going to run it because it's going to crash my computer since it's an infinite loop. 0 times 2 is 0. It'll just resetting itself to be I equals 0 every time. We'd actually want to start this at 1. Alright, so 1, as long as it's less than 100, let's see, 1 times 2 is 2, times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32, 64, and it probably would stop at 64 because 64 times 2 is greater than 100. Let's see. Sure enough, it does. Alright, so these are the first types of things that you'll need to do with for loops. Okay, it might also ask you to write a for loop to generate the following output. A, B, oopsie, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. No, I don't think there's an alphabet thing. We'll just stick to numbers for now. We don't have to stick to those. Let's see, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, so you'd have to write a for loop that would generate that output. See if you can do that now. Pause the video. Alright, by now you've probably unpaused, and hopefully you've written something that looks like this. Alright, so these are all kinds of different questions that you might get on for loops. Now, let's shake it up a little bit. So we're going to change this back to 0. We're going to change this back to just +1, so it iterates through 10 times. We're going to do something called a nested for loop, which is a for loop inside a for loop. The AP exam will only give you 2 levels of these. It won't give you 3, so you don't have to blow your mind too much, but you should know what happens when you have a for loop inside of another for loop. An example of which would be this. Notice how the initialization variable is different from before. I've apparently messed up somewhere. Oh, there we go. Alright, so now what we want to do is we want to be able to predict the output. How many times are the words predict the output going to appear in the console? If you guessed 10 times, you're correct. There they are. Okay, that's because this for loop, the outer one, executes 10 times from 0 to 10, adding 1 to I every time. And all this for loop does is execute this for loop, which executes only once because it starts at 0, runs while x is less than 5, and adds 5 to x every time. Okay, let's try this way. How many times would this for loop run? Or how many times would predict the output appear on the screen here? If you guessed 20, you're correct. You're not correct. Actually, you might be correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, you're correct. It's 20 times. Right, so there's a lot of different ways to analyze these for loops and pick them apart. We could, if we wanted, we could add a counter to tell us the number of times that this happens. Okay, so for example, we could add a variable, an integer, outside of all these loops and start it at 0. And every time we predict the output, we could add 1 to this counter. We could say system dot, we could say counter plus plus, which adds 1 to it, and then print out that counter to keep track of how many times it appears. sure enough is 20. These are common problems too. How many times will, X appear on the screen? So let's go ahead and do some testing. Try this one. If you run your program and you got it right, that's good. Try this one. If you run your program and you got it right, that's good. Okay, so that's the first type of questions. Basically all the types of things you'll have to do with for loops and nested for loops, which are great. So that takes care of for loops for us. We're going to knock that off of our list. Okay, enhanced for loops are actually very similar, with one exception. They're used specifically for arrays. So if I'm actually going to look it up for you, so let's see, enhanced for loop Java. So check these out. Here's the documentation. So the way that this works is, and I'm going to go ahead and delete our code from before. The way an enhanced for loop works, oops, you know me, I like my formatting, is it looks for a bunch of elements in an array, and it just loops through all of the elements in the array. You don't have to specify, like in a regular for loop, you'd probably have to do for integer I equals 0, I is less than array, I think it's size of in JavaScript or something. Okay, and actually, let's go ahead and generate an array for ourselves. So let's say, I'm not sure I know how to do this. Create array Java. Just a basic array. That's all we need. Here we go. We're just going to go ahead and take their code. Alright, so here is an array of integers. It looks like we're going to do allocate the memory for them. Memory is a thing, by the way, in Java, not so much the web. Kind of lame, but forget about it. It looks like we're going to do, let's change this from 100. Let's keep it low numbers just so we don't go crazy. Alright, so normally, and it's called an array. So normally we'd have to do this. I think I did size of wrong. I think size of array Java. I think size of comes first. Or array size. So many different ways to do things in Java. It's really annoying, honestly. No. Is it this? No. Jeez. I guess it's r.length. Or just an array.length. Sure, okay. So in a normal, wow, that took a long time. In a normal for loop, we'd have to do it this way, where we'd set this, and then we could say, current integer, temporary integer would be an array at I. Okay, but instead, in the enhanced for loop, you don't actually need to do that. So in the enhanced for loop, we have an element in an array, that's the name of the variable, and we could print that out right here. And let's go ahead and see if that works. Okay, sure enough, it prints out the numbers in the array. All right, so it's a little bit less work that we have to do in an enhanced for loop, and if you're working with arrays, that's what you want to use it for. In fact, it's only useful for arrays and things like lists, so you don't use it for anything else but those. Right? But that's the enhanced for loop. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of these, moving right along. So that's our enhanced for loop. All right, while loops, again, all the same purpose, just different way to do it. While loops work a little bit like this. While, we'll say integer I is less than 10. It looks like I might have made a mistake in my syntax. This happens all the time. It looks like integer needs to be a variable already. While, oops. Yeah, okay. So you can't do the local variable declaration like you can in a for loop, but we can do it this way. So while we have an integer I, and that's equal to 0, we want to do something. Okay? So while loops will happen forever as long as their condition remains true. So if we were to type in system.out.println, predict the output, this would go on forever, infinitely. Okay. So what you want to do with while loops is when you want something to go on until a certain condition is met. Usually these are something that people will use, but I prefer to use for loops anyway, just because it makes more sense to me to use one type. But while loops are good, especially for things like booleans. So if you had a boolean variable that was true, and you wanted a loop to run forever while that was true until it was false, then it's good. So similar to a boolean, we're going to set I is equal to 0 here, and when we feel like it, we could set I equal to another number and stop the loop. Okay. So let's pretend that we wanted to perform this operation, I don't know, until the user typed in a certain word. Okay. So we could string input system.in.wow. Let's see, do I remember how to do this? I gotta look back through our code from the last project. Oh, no. Let's see. Collect user input Java. Forgot how to do that. System.in dot something. Oh, there it is. You have to use this thing called a scanner. So we initialize a scanner, and we have to import it, blah, blah, blah. Import dot scanner. No. Hold on. I had this code, but I deleted it. Don't delete code. There it is, java.util.scanner. There you go. And then we need this, which is already in. And then it's dot next line. Good. Okay, so string input is equal to the name of the scanner, which is reader.next line. Okay. So we could say enter your favorite month. Okay, so we're going to say enter your favorite month. We're going to ask the user to enter it, which is what this does. And then we're going to check that value. So if input equals, my favorite month is March, because that's when I was born. And let's go ahead and do some validation, make sure that everything's lowercase. just like in JavaScript. If input to lowercase is March, only if it's March we'll change I to be 3. Doesn't actually matter as long as it's not 0, and that'll stop the loop. What kind of error do we got here? Comparing string. Oh, right. Right. Okay. Stupid stuff. Okay, so we have enter your favorite month, get some input, check to see if it's equal to March. Otherwise, why don't we say system.out.println, I'm sorry, that month is terrible. Please try again. Alright, so this is supposed to run until I type March. Let's see what happens. Run. Enter your favorite month. June. I'm sorry, that month is terrible. Please try again. May. Let's see what happens if we say March. Looks like the program stops. Okay, we could add, a little congratulations message here. Congratulations, that month rocks. Okay, but that explains it, right? So this is one example of a while loop, and that gives you a good idea of how these things work. Finally, the last loop that we have to tackle today is the do while loop. Okay, so do while loops basically the same thing as while loops, just slightly modified. I'm not really sure they're slightly modified, but hey. So let's go ahead and get this. Right, the only difference between do while and just while is that do while loops evaluate their expression at the end of the statement's execution, whereas while loops do it first. That really shouldn't change how you code any of them, in all honesty, because it's really a very minor difference. Okay. However, if integer I started out as 3 and you wanted to perform this same code in your do while loop, and you wanted to do it while I is equal to 0, this should probably print out once because the do while loop is going to do it. It's going to do the do first and then evaluate, whereas the while loop is going to evaluate first. Just to see, let's see what happens. See, notice how even though integer is 3 and we set while I is 0, we did, we were able to run this once, and no matter what we type in, it should stop. Okay, if we do that again, even if we type in the wrong month, it'll stop because I is still 3, and it's going to finally evaluate the expression. Right? So that's the difference between a do while loop and a while loop. And that's all we have for today. So next time what we're going to do is we're going to examine these a little bit more closely, do some nested loop practice, and test your mettle a little bit with loops. But that's it. Go ahead and fill out your assessment on Schoology, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye!